I used to think people noticed when someone they loved was gone. I don't mean the obvious part. Of course they noticed the missing body in the bed, the extra plate left in the dish rack, the shoes still lined up by the door. I thought the world itself noticed. I thought things would look wrong in some visible way. The street outside would feel different. The house would reject the silence. Even strangers at the grocery store would take one look at your face and know something had been torn out of your life. It wasn't like that. The morning my wife disappeared, the garbage truck still came. A neighbor jogged past our driveway with her dog. The woman at the gas station asked if I wanted a receipt. Everything kept going with this ugly, normal momentum while I walked around in it like a man who had been hit in the head. Her name was Mara. We had been married 8 years. We weren't one of those couples who looked perfect from the outside and were rotten underneath. We fought sometimes. We got on each other's nerves. We worried about money more than we admitted. But our life was real, and it was ours. We had a small house at the end of a dead-end road, a mutt named Oliver, and the kind of routine that gets mocked by people who haven't learned how good routine can feel. The night before she vanished had been ordinary. She made pasta. I dried the dishes while she wiped down the counter. We watched half a documentary neither of us cared much about. She took Oliver outside before bed because he was scratching at the back door. I remember I was brushing my teeth when she came back in. She stood in the bathroom doorway and told me her sister had texted about Easter plans. I grunted through a mouthful of toothpaste. She laughed at how stupid I sounded. That was the last normal moment I ever had. When I woke up the next morning, her side of the bed was empty. That by itself meant nothing. She got up before me a lot, but the house felt too still. No water running, no cabinet doors, no TV murmuring from the living room. Oliver was downstairs whining at the front door, which was open a few inches. I found her phone on the kitchen counter, keys in the bowl by the wall, wallet in her purse hanging off the chair. At first I thought she had gone outside for some reason. Maybe Oliver slipped out and she chased after him. But Oliver was in the house. I called for her anyway, then louder, then with that edge already creeping into my voice. I checked the yard, the road, the patch of woods behind our place. Nothing. I called her sister, then 2 of her friends, then the police. They asked the usual questions. Was she depressed? Was she on medication? Did we argue? Did she ever leave before? Did she know anyone who might want to hurt her? I answered all of it numbly, then angrily, then with shame because I could hear myself sounding defensive. A uniformed officer stood in our kitchen and looked at me with practiced calm, while another took notes. By afternoon, they were talking about voluntary disappearance as one possibility. One of them said adults were allowed to leave if they wanted. I remember staring at him and thinking I might hit him if he said one more word like that in my house. Mara would not have gone anywhere without her phone, her wallet, or her car. She wouldn't have left Oliver. She wouldn't have left me with the front door standing open. The searches started that evening. Friends came, then neighbors, then people I barely knew but who wanted to help because that's what decent people do when something bad happens close enough to touch. We looked in ditches, drainage pipes, empty lots, construction sites, the tree line near the highway, an abandoned shed a mile down the road. The police brought in dogs one day. A volunteer group searched the creek bank. Somebody started a page online with her photo and what she'd been wearing. though no one actually knew what she'd been wearing, because she hadn't been in bed when I woke, and her robe was gone from the hook. I stopped sleeping properly after the 4th day. I would lie down for an hour, and then jolt awake, my heart beating hard, convinced I had heard the garage door, or her footsteps on the porch. Every sound became a possibility. Every car slowing outside the house made me stand up. I kept thinking about all the things I should have done differently, all the tiny choices that maybe had mattered. Maybe I should have gotten up when Oliver scratched at the door. Maybe I should have checked the lock before bed. Maybe she called my name and I slept through it. You can go insane living inside, maybe. The police searched our house twice. They drained part of a retention pond off the main road. They questioned me more than once, and I understood why. But it still hollowed me out in a way I don't know how to explain. A detective with a tired face asked me to walk him through the whole evening again. He stood in our bedroom while I described brushing my teeth and hearing Mara laugh in the bathroom doorway. When I got to that part, my voice broke and I had to sit down on the bed. 3 weeks passed. By then I had stopped answering some calls because I couldn't stand another person saying they were praying, or that they just knew she'd come home. I hated hope by then. Hope was a hook that kept tearing the same place open. The day she came back, I was in the living room with Oliver's head in my lap, not watching the TV. I heard the front gate click. Then I heard footsteps on the porch. I stood up so fast I knocked the coffee table with my shin. Oliver barked once and bolted for the door. Mara opened it and stepped inside. Even now, saying that feels wrong. It should have come with something dramatic. Mud, blood, torn clothes, a look in her eyes that told me where she had been. But she just walked in wearing jeans, sneakers, and a gray sweatshirt I had never seen before. Her hair was dirty and tangled. Her face looked thinner. She had no cuts on her, no bruises that I could see. She didn't look drugged. She didn't look terrified. She looked exhausted and confused. I got to her before the door had swung shut. I grabbed her so hard she gasped. I kept saying her name into her shoulder, over and over, like I was trying to force it back into the world. She was cold from outside. Her body felt real. She put one hand against my chest, not pushing me away, just steadying herself. She said very softly, "I'm sorry." That's when I started crying. Not the movie version. I folded apart. My legs almost went out from under me. Oliver was jumping and whining and clawing at both of us. The next days were a blur of police cars, paramedics, interviews, hospital lights, and people talking too much. She told them she didn't remember where she had been. She remembered being in the house that night. Then she remembered almost nothing, until she was walking down a road a few miles away and saw our street sign. No signs of assault. No obvious physical injuries. Mild dehydration. Stress. That was what the doctors gave us. Stress. Like she'd been delayed at an airport. The police questioned her separately from me. They asked whether she had been taken, whether she had gone willingly, whether she was protecting someone. I heard the same questions later, because she repeated them to me while sitting on the side of our bed, staring at her hands. "I don't know what happened," she said. "I wish I did." There was a deep rawness in her voice that made me believe her. The investigation kept going, at least officially. They traced nothing useful from the clothes she wore home. No ID in them, no tags that led anywhere. No fibers or prints that got us an answer. The gray sweatshirt might as well have fallen out of the sky. Her phone still held nothing. No strange messages. No secret accounts. No evidence of some hidden life. A part of me had been afraid of that too, and I hated myself for it. We started therapy within a week. Her idea first, then mine. Separate therapists, then a couples therapist later. We had to talk to somebody because every room in the house had become crowded with things we could not say to each other without choking on them. At first I was scared to leave her alone. Then I was scared of hovering. I wanted to protect her and also avoid making her feel watched. She seemed grateful to be home, but distant in these small, hard-to-name ways. Sometimes I'd catch her in the hallway with a blank expression, like she had forgotten where she was for a second. Loud noises made her flinch. She barely slept. When she did sleep, she thrashed enough to wake both of us. But recovery, when it happens at all, doesn't look dramatic either. It's a string of small, tolerable things. She started making grocery lists again. She took Oliver for short walks and then longer ones. She sat through the couple's sessions even when they left her drained and silent afterward. She let me hold her when she cried, which she did rarely and without warning. One afternoon I came home from work and found her in the yard pulling dead weeds with garden gloves on, as if she had just decided to begin living again from the flower beds outward. We learned how to be careful with each other. Trust was a strange word in those months. People use it like it only means believing someone won't lie. For us, it became more basic than that. Trust meant I could go to work and believe she would still be home when I returned. Trust meant she could wake from a bad dream and accept that the room around her was ours. Trust meant not forcing answers that didn't exist. We did start getting pieces of ourselves back. The first time she laughed for real after returning, we were in the kitchen, and Oliver had stolen half a sandwich off the counter. He was old enough that he looked embarrassed while doing it, which made her snort unexpectedly. I turned and saw that expression on her face, the real one, the one I had been starving for, and something in my chest loosened. We began touching each other again in normal ways, her hand at the small of my back while passing in the hall, my head on her shoulder during a movie, her bare foot bumping my leg under the blanket on the couch. None of it was dramatic. All of it mattered. Our therapist warned us that trauma recovery was not linear. She said progress could make room for new fear, that periods of calm could be followed by setbacks that felt worse because they came after hope. I nodded like I understood. I didn't. Not really. It was around 2 months after Mara came home when I woke in the night and saw her standing over me. The room was dark, but not fully dark. Enough streetlight came through the gap in the curtains to make shapes. I was on my back. She was beside the bed, close enough that I could hear her breathing. My first thought was that she'd had a nightmare. Then I saw the angle of her head. It was tilted too far to one side. Not in a way that looked theatrical or ghostly or anything I would have used to scare myself before. It looked wrong in a plain, anatomical way. The kind of wrong that makes your own neck ache in sympathy. Her chin was nearly pointed toward her shoulder, but the rest of her body hung loose and still. Her hair was down, covering part of her face. I could see one eye through it, open, fixed on me. I didn't move because I was still in that thick place between sleep and waking, and because something underneath thought moving would matter. I let my breathing stay heavy, slow. I kept my eyes narrowed the way they are when you're pretending to be dead asleep as a kid and your parent checks on you. She stood there. No sound except her breathing. I waited for her to speak, to shake me, to climb back into bed. Nothing happened. I could feel every beat of my heart in the mattress. At one point I thought maybe her head had shifted a little farther, but I can't swear to that. Fear changes distance. It changes shape. It can make a second feel stretched thin as wire. I stayed still so long my shoulder started burning. My tongue felt swollen in my mouth. I wanted to believe there was some reason that fit inside the world I knew. Sleepwalking, a panic episode, disassociation. Any clinical word would have saved me then. She remained there until pale light began to collect at the edge of the curtains. Then she straightened her head, turned, and walked out of the room. That was all. I lay there for a long time after, not because I was shocked into stillness, though I was, but because I was ashamed of how badly I wanted to stay in bed and pretend none of it had happened. When I finally went downstairs, she was in the kitchen making coffee. Warm light over the counter, radio on low, Oliver sleeping by the table. Mara turned when she heard me and smiled in that tired, ordinary way people do first thing in the morning. "Hey," she said. "You slept hard." I stared at her before I could stop myself. Her face looked normal, maybe a little pale. Maybe anyone would have looked pale after a bad night. "You okay?" she asked. I said yes. She poured coffee into my mug exactly the way she always had, with too much cream because she said I liked to pretend I drank it black, but I never did. She asked whether I'd remembered to send an invoice the day before. She reminded me that Oliver needed more food. She kissed my cheek while passing behind me to get a spoon. There are moments in life when your mind splits in two. One part keeps performing the ordinary scene because it knows the script. The other is standing outside it, pounding on the glass. I said nothing about the night. Part of that was cowardice. Part was the fear that if I said it aloud, she would either deny it convincingly enough to make me doubt myself, or she would look at me in some new way that I was not ready to see. At work, I could barely do anything useful. I stared at emails. I reread the same 3 lines of a quote request until the words stopped looking like language. I called our therapist's office and left a message saying we needed to move our next appointment up if possible. I almost called Mara 3 times and didn't. I kept replaying the image of her eye through her hair. Toward afternoon, I started to get angry at myself. Maybe this was a symptom. Maybe she needed help. And I was sitting there acting like I was in a horror movie because my wife had one terrifying episode in the night. People do strange things under stress. Trauma can wear a person's mind into weird shapes. I knew this. I had read enough, sat in enough waiting rooms, listened to enough experts to know that one frightening event did not erase everything else. When I got home, the front door was open. Oliver never would have been outside loose. Mara knew that. He was too old and half-deaf, and he wandered if startled. I parked badly and got out without shutting the car door. The house was silent, not empty silent, not peaceful. There was a smell under the air that didn't belong. Metallic, animal, thick. I called Mara's name once from the doorway. No answer. Then I heard a wet ticking sound from the kitchen floor. At first I thought a faucet was dripping. Oliver was in the hallway between the kitchen and living room. I still have trouble explaining what was left of him without feeling like I'm lying for effect. He had been opened. That is the plainest way to say it. The fur along his side was soaked black-red and split apart. The damage was not like a dog fight or a car strike or anything accidental. It was close, deliberate work. One front leg was bent under him at an angle that had no joint in it. His throat was torn so deeply the white of his neck showed through the blood and muscle. There was blood sprayed low on the wall, blood pooled beneath his ribs, blood tracked in one partial bare footprint across the kitchen tile before it smeared away. His eyes were open. There are images you cannot file anywhere in yourself. They don't become memory. They remain present. I think I made a sound then. Not a word. Something ugly and helpless. I dropped to my knees beside him before I understood he was gone. His body was still warm. That detail ruined me more than anything else. If he had been cold, it would have meant some distance from the act, some time in which this had existed without me. Warm meant whoever did it had been here moments before I came through the door. I stood up too fast and almost slipped in the blood. Mara. I shouted her name through the whole house. Bedroom, bathroom, guest room, basement, garage, closets, backyard. I grabbed the fire poker from beside the fireplace without deciding to. My own voice sounded like someone else's. She was gone. Her purse was still on the chair. Her phone was on the counter again. There was blood on the sink. A thin, diluted pink around the drain, like someone had rinsed their hands in a hurry. One of the kitchen towels was missing. The back door stood ajar. The police came quickly because of the history, and because I must have sounded out of my mind on the call. 2 officers took me outside while another went through the house. I kept saying, "My dog is in there. My dog is in there." And the sentence sounded stupid even as I said it, like the worst thing in the house was too small to deserve language. Then I told them my wife was missing again. The same detective came out after a while, older somehow than he had looked months earlier. He had me sit on the back step and start from the morning. I told him everything except the night scene at first. Then I told him that too, because holding it back suddenly felt insane. He didn't laugh. He didn't look skeptical in the way I expected. He just listened, face carefully neutral, and asked me to repeat exactly how long she'd been standing there. I said I didn't know. Crime scene techs moved through my house in white suits while the evening went dark around us. Flash after flash reflected in the windows. A neighbor tried to bring me water. Another tried to ask what happened. I hated them for being near enough to smell dinner on their clothes. The officer who took Oliver away did it gently. That should not matter, but it does. I watched them zip him into a black bag and carry him past me like something sacred that had already been ruined beyond dignity. Mara was gone again. And this time they did not talk to me about voluntary disappearance. They found traces of blood in the shower drain later. Some of it matched Oliver. Some did not match anyone on file. They took samples from me, from Mara's hairbrush, from old medical records they could access. Weeks later, they would tell me the unidentified blood was human, but degraded enough that they could not get what they wanted from it. I never learned whether that meant there wasn't enough, or there was too much mixed together, or whether they were sparing me details. There were no signs of forced entry. No neighbors saw anyone come or go. One man on the next street over reported hearing Oliver bark once, then yelp, then stop. That was all. I moved into a hotel for a while because I couldn't bear the house after they cleaned what they could. Blood has a way of not leaving completely. You can paint over a wall, scrub tile, replace flooring, and still feel where it happened when you stand there. The police searched for Mara again. Search parties again. Drones, dogs, interviews, road cameras, phone records, bank records, every modern method that promises the illusion that no one can simply vanish anymore. No sign. I spent the next months giving statements, answering calls, and trying not to break in public. People's sympathy shifts when tragedy returns. The first disappearance had made us a story others could enter with confidence. Missing wife comes home. Husband and wife heal. Community supports them. The second time after Oliver, people grew careful around me. Their faces changed. Some were afraid for me. Some were afraid of me. You can feel suspicion like a draft in a room. Nothing was ever proved against Mara because there was no Mara to charge. Nothing was proved against anyone else either. The case narrowed and widened and narrowed again. Detectives changed. Leads dried up. One theory replaced another. Abduction. Mental break. Unknown accomplice. I heard so many versions of my own life from people in sensible shoes that eventually I stopped trying to correct them. I sold the house less than a year later, at a loss. I told the buyers the factual history because I had to. They stood in the kitchen pretending to absorb it like adults making a practical decision. I wanted to grab them both by the shoulders and tell them houses remember. That there are places where the air goes wrong and never fully rights itself. But that would have sounded mad. And maybe it would not even be true. Maybe the wrongness belonged to us and followed us there. I keep thinking about the months in between, before the night by the bed, when she seemed to be coming back to me. I think about the small things. Her hand resting on my back while I washed dishes. The way she stood at the window with a mug in both hands. The laugh when Oliver stole the sandwich. Those moments were real. I know they were. I felt them. So what does that make the rest? Sometimes I tried to imagine that Mara had come home damaged in some way no one understood. That whatever happened during those missing weeks had split her mind, and she had become dangerous without meaning to. That version is awful, but at least it stays inside the borders of things I can name. Then I remember the way she stood over me with her head bent farther than it should go, breathing softly through parted lips, while she watched my face for signs I was awake. I remember how patient she was, and I think there was a point, somewhere in those lost 3 weeks, when the woman I loved did not come all the way back. I still dream about breakfast from that last morning. Not the night. Breakfast. The sound of the spoon against the mug. Her asking whether we needed dog food soon. Sunlight on the counter. Her mouth curving when she looked at me. I have gone over every second of that scene more times than I can count, trying to see something in it I missed. Blood under her nails, a stiffness in her smile, some visible crack. But memory isn't a camera, and guilt is a bad editor. It adds too much and leaves out the worst parts. People ask me, very rarely now, whether I think she's alive. I say I don't know. That is the answer that makes them most comfortable. The truth is more complicated. Alive is one question. Herself is another. A few years after she vanished the second time, A detective called to say there had been possible movement on the case. Human remains had been found outside another town, partial and badly damaged, and because of distance and timing, they had to consider every open file. I listened to him explain it in his professional voice, while gripping the edge of the counter in my apartment so hard my hand cramped. It wasn't her. I sat on the kitchen floor after that call and laughed until I got sick. Not from relief. Relief would have been clean. It was because I understood, all at once, that some part of me had been waiting for them to tell me she was dead. Because death would have pinned the story down. Death would have made it one thing. Finished. Human. But there was no body. There was only the front door opening after 3 weeks. The therapy bills in a folder. The smell of coffee. My old dog split open on the tile. A smear of bare blood on the kitchen floor. A woman who might have been my wife standing in the dark and watching me pretend to sleep. I live alone now. I have not remarried. I have not even come close. That isn't loyalty. It's damage. Every relationship after enough damage becomes archaeology. I check locks more than once. I sleep lightly. I do not own another dog because I cannot stand the idea of loving something that trusts me that completely again. Sometimes in places that are not home, I wake with that same cold certainty that someone is standing over me. Hotel rooms are worst. Spare bedrooms in other people's houses. The disorientation helps. For a second I become the man in our old bed again, eyes slitted, body still, waiting for morning to save him. Morning never saved me. It only made the next part possible. There is one thing I never told the police because it sounded too small, and because by then I was already tired of hearing myself explain impossible details to men with notepads. That morning at breakfast, when Mara leaned down to kiss my cheek, I smelled something under the coffee and soap. Not perfume, not blood exactly, though maybe that was part of it. It smelled like damp earth that had been sealed up somewhere with no air, then opened. I smelled it again once, years later, walking past a storm drain after heavy rain. It hit me so hard I staggered. I stood there gripping a fence until the feeling passed while people around me kept walking. I don't go near that street anymore. I know how this sounds when written down. I know where reasonable people's minds go first. Trauma, misremembering, a wife who snapped, a husband who couldn't bear the randomness and built something stranger to hold it. Maybe. But reasonable people did not see her head bend. Reasonable people did not kneel in my hallway with their hands in the warmth of a dog they had raised from a puppy, while the house still held the last movements of whatever had done it. Reasonable people did not live through the months before that, and feel, every now and then, in tiny flashes too fast to grab, that the person sitting across from them was studying how to be seen as human. I think about one session with our couples therapist. She asked Mara what home felt like after everything that had happened. Mara sat quiet long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she looked around the office, at the framed degrees and fake plant and box of tissues, and said, "It feels almost right." At the time, I thought she meant she still felt detached. Now I hear it differently. Almost right. That is what scares me most after all these years. Not the gore, not the missing time, not even the fact that she was never found. It is the thought that whatever came back had learned enough. Enough to smile. Enough to cry in therapy. enough to hold me at night and ask whether I wanted toast with my eggs, enough to stand in my kitchen with morning light on its face and pass for the woman I loved. Almost right. And then, for one night, maybe because it was tired or hungry or careless, it forgot how far a neck should bend. That is the only mistake it ever made. As far as I know, it made none after that. Sometimes I imagine it somewhere else now. Another town, another small house, another man feeling grateful beyond words because his missing wife has come home, friends hugging them in the yard, police asking gentle questions, casseroles arriving, therapy appointments booked, a life carefully stitched back together. I imagine him waking one night and finding her beside the bed, watching. I imagine him making the same choice I did, to keep still and wait for daylight because daylight belongs to reason, and reason must be stronger. I hope for his sake that he gets out of bed before work and never goes back into the house. I hope he doesn't smell coffee and decide that ordinary things are enough proof. I hope his dog gets to die of age. But hope has always been the cruelest part of this story. So the honest ending is this. I think Mara came home. I also think she did not. And whatever walked out of my back door after opening my dog from throat to belly is still somewhere under the same sky, wearing a face people trust until the light changes, or the hunger gets too strong, or it slips for a second and lets its head fall too far to one side. If that sounds impossible, you can keep your impossible. I had a wife. Then I had something that knew where she kept the coffee.